Welcome to All Metals and Forge, presenting Manufacturing Talk Radio. Thanks for being here today. And Tim, why don't you do our intro for Mr. Anthony Nieves?
Well, we're excited to be broadcasting live so that people can get this information as it comes hot off the presses. Joining us is Anthony Nieves, who is the committee chair from the Institute for Supply Management on the services sector. And his report looks very good this month. It is reflecting August. It's reflecting a lot of expansion. So I will let Anthony jump in here. Welcome to the show, Anthony.
Thank you for having me on the show. It's a pleasure. And you're right, Tim, the report came in very strong. We had an all-time high in prior months, and last month at 64.1, this month came in at 61.7, down 2.4 percentage points for the composite index. Still a very strong reading. As we know, anything over 50 measures expansion month over month, and we're measuring that change month over month. And even with this slight pullback, that reflects very strong growth for the services sector for the month of August.
I'd like to point out also that the number has been over 60 for 6 straight months.
That's amazing, isn't it?
It's amazing. It's amazing. You almost deserve a yellow jacket.
Well, I appreciate that. I'll take credit for it. Just don't give me the discredit if it goes below 50.
Anthony, what are your respondents saying and feeling as you look at this report?
Well, you know, there is a common theme amongst all of the respondents, the survey respondents for the month of August, and we have kind of varying situations going on in this sector. So as strong as the growth has been month over month, we still have capacity constraints. And the capacity is limited by things such as slowing deliveries. And that's attributed to not only trucks and availability of truckers, it's also port congestion. For example, just out here in Los Angeles, I think last week we had 44 container ships waiting to offload outside of Los Angeles, just sitting there. And it's typically, I think, a 6 or 7 day wait in the queue to get offloaded. Coupled with a shortage of containers makes it even more difficult. So that coupled with material shortages, inflation, labor, what a tight labor market we have. And we saw that the jobs report came out and that indicated that jobs were down. And there's a litany of reasons why. And part of it is certain particular industries within this sector. Some people do not want to go back to work. The Delta variant has had some impact on that. But think about this, with unemployment, stimulus money, some of those low-paying, low-skilled level jobs, people would rather stay home and not be exposed. And that's mostly in what we see as the customer-facing type jobs that are available out there. And companies are just struggling backfilling positions. And we see that in the leisure markets, in the restaurant industry, as well as in across hospitality and some of the other segments.
It's kind of interesting that you bring up the arts and entertainment industry, that one being the only one who had a downward trend in this report. 17 industries are over 60, and this, I don't remember the number offhand, but art and entertainment has gone down.
Well, they've been struggling all throughout. They had some growth over the past few months, but that's movie theaters, amusement parks,
right.
High concentration of people. Proximity is the key thing. It's tough to maintain social distancing and have any kind of fill in the movie theaters. And so that's been a challenge. And they were pretty much shut down for the majority of COVID. And as the protocol loosened up, they were able to bring some clients, guests in, and now look at what's happened with the variant. So people are wary.
I want to remind our viewers and listeners that on Tuesday, we will be doing the Hospital Purchasing Managers Index report with Nancy LeMaster. And that's always interesting. It is a segment of the healthcare sector. And Anthony, the healthcare sector falls into the services report. Are they doing strong because they're busy to the gills with the variant, or are they profitable?
Great question, Tim. And we actually have a respondent comment in the report that addresses that. And it basically says that, I'll paraphrase it, that ancillary type of surgeries and services are now opening up in the hospitals. It's not just regulated to treating COVID. You know, as we know, when the pandemic hit, most elective procedures and surgeries went out the window. People weren't going near the hospitals. Now they're starting to see that it's getting busier. The usage of pharmaceuticals has also increased, and we've had in the past months that was always in high price and short supply on the commodities listing. So we're seeing definitely from the pent-up demand that existed in this sector, it's now impacting in a positive way on the healthcare and social assistance industry for this sector.
So what are the big trends? Are there any headwinds? What is the services sector looking at going forward and kind of drumming their fingers on the desktop?
Well, it's, you know, looking at the logistics challenges that we're experiencing, and that's affecting, if you look at the indexes in this report, supplier deliveries, inventories, prices. So I'll start with supplier deliveries, continuing to slow. 69.6, it's down 2.4 percentage points from the 72 of last month, but still slowing at a very high rate. So, and that, again, as I mentioned, with the ports and with trucks, also slower rail service. We also have capacity issues, right? Capacity constraints, the output upstream in the supply chain. We have this increased demand and we don't have the supply to meet the demand. That's affecting inventories. Inventories are still contracting. We're talking at looking at 46.9 this month. It's down slightly from the 49.2 last month, but the different companies in these industries cannot replenish their supplies fast enough. They can't replenish the inventory fast enough. And that has resulted, looking at prices, when the demand exceeds the supply. We've had material shortages. As Lou well knows, metals are very strong pricing right now. We're seeing it across the board: steel, copper, aluminum. All these things are resulting in higher material costs, higher prices. It transposes into higher prices for this sector. As I've mentioned in the past on the show, many of the companies that are on the manufacturing side are supplier providers to the services side, and vice versa. So we see that anything that happens on manufacturing, inversely, it does, conversely, I should say, it impacts the services sector.
One thing I'd like to point out also about the container issue, it's not just that there aren't enough containers. The containers that exist now, instead of going for $4,000 for a full container, they're costing somewhere around $18,000. And the traffic is slowed down, and those, as you pointed out, those ships are out in the sea, almost like when LA had the port strike. They had a couple of hundred ships out going across the Pacific. So naturally, the cost of a container quadrupling has a major effect on product pricing.
Absolutely. And we're seeing that across the board. Transportation costs overall have been reported up in price by our respondents. And we're seeing that on truckload and less than truckload costs. Fuel has come down in the last week, but it's still very high compared to where we were sitting last year at this point in time. So fuel costs drive a lot of cost in the services sector. They're very reliant on overland trucking, as we see with multi-unit service companies that have disparate locations. And wholesale trade is big because they add that time and place value in the distribution channel for the services sector.
Just one other point. I'm sorry, Tim. There was just one other point that you were talking about: transportation and logistics. One of the problems that is not a quick fix is that we don't have enough drivers, and that's partly because of the fact that we have a slower birth rate. We have fewer people that want to go into trucking. I mean, when was the last time before now did you see major trucking companies advertising for drivers on primetime television?
Oh, absolutely. And the elephant in the room is also the background checks and drug testing has definitely decimated the truck driver ranks.
Or is there something wrong with driving cross country smoking a joint?
I don't know. We were, hey, Lou, whatever works for you.
I don't drive a truck.
It's just the trucking company. It's interesting, this transportation issue, Lou. You and Anthony have both mentioned these ships bobbing around in the ocean, 44 outside of the port of Los Angeles. You also have ports up the West Coast, San Francisco, San Diego. You've got Portland, Vancouver, Seattle, into Canada, Prince Rupert. They all have the same issue. They all have shipped out in the water waiting to offload. They don't have enough staff to offload them because of COVID. There's between 12 and 20,000 containers per ship. Now they're not getting unloaded and going back to China. China has a shortage of empty containers coming back. So it's a real sticky wicket. And I know that we've talked to you about this, Anthony, before, but I just want you to remind the folks, we don't see this lightening up even going into now the holiday season, do we?
Not at all. And let us not forget Ida, right? New Orleans, Louisiana, the ports there. This weather, it will definitely impact things as we look at it next month and see what the report has to reflect on that. We've had issues and we have chemical refineries as well down in the Gulf states. So this is all going to be a mess. And as far as to your point about, we're not seeing this go away anytime soon. Our respondents have mentioned over the past months that they see this continuing on through the balance of the year and into the first quarter of next year, still trying to play catch up with the capacity issues that they're having right now and the logistics challenges.
So what does the supply chain manager do? I know that the Institute for Supply Management has certification courses to help you become a professional purchasing manager. What does a supply chain professional do under these really difficult and unusual circumstances?
Well, every company has to have contingency plans in place with workarounds, but it doesn't alleviate the bottleneck that we're seeing. That's why we're seeing everything just slow down. The cycle times have lengthened for product. This sector rather was more just in time than say on the manufacturing side. It was more demand pull. And so now, we went from just in time to fly by the seat of your pants, so to speak. And, it's a little tough trying to play catch up throughout. And we're seeing that affect the pricing, especially food products. We're seeing food products, the pricing go up there, not only in the supermarkets, but the restaurants. And then you throw a markup on top of that. It's you're starting to see menu prices increase and average checks increase. And and we're still addressing all this pent up demand. It has not alleviated that much over the past months, as we can see by these numbers.
Anthony, in your sector, also have forestry, which drives. In your sector, you have forestry, which drives lumber. And because I think, still have tariff on Canadian lumber coming into this country, we have a housing shortage. We have a demand for housing. Builders are busy. Where is that? And are your respondents concerned where they stand in that industry?
Great question. I think that lumber prices actually came down a little bit, and that's because housing starts came off a little bit. Didn't mean that real estate slowed down a little bit last month and into this month compared to their rate of growth in the past. And part of that has to do with not having available inventory of homes, whether it's the resale homes, and as I mentioned, the new starts went down. The challenge has been with lumber is that, as you mentioned, not only the tariffs, but in Canada, they're having a challenge with having workers go in there and process the wood. And so the output is down from the mills there as well. So we're seeing that not just in Canada, but across the board where lumber is being sourced globally.
How about the mining sector? The mining sector, which was struggling 2 years ago, did all right through COVID. Are they continuing to remain strong?
they're still in expansion territory. It's come down a little bit from where they were, a few months ago. But to your point, for 2 years, they were the drag, the anchor on this sector as far as holding it back. We talk about the 18 industries. It would always be like one or two industries, and mining was always in there as, contracting and not having growth. And they've come out of that. And so they're holding their own, but they still have their limitations based on certain products that, what affects them, believe it or not, in that industry is when we've had shortage of tires. Think about the big exploration equipment and the size of the tires that they have on their equipment. And they were struggling with that for a while. And they also kind of how the oil industry goes, they're correlated directly to that with some of the different mining companies that service those industries and whatnot. So overall, they're doing okay. They're doing good, but they still have the same challenges that we're seeing throughout this sector with logistics and capacity and everything else.
Anthony, in regard to the fact that in the month of September, the end of this month, the COVID unemployment checks are going to be going away. How do you think that's going to wind up affecting a lot of the negative issues we're talking about? Absence of people to do jobs, and so on. They don't want to go to work because they're collecting the check. I mean, how do you see that may affect the October numbers?
Yeah, that's a good point on how that affects the numbers. Now, keep in mind, we've had these jobs out there that companies are having difficulty backfilling, right?
Right.
So I think it's going to vary industry by industry because the workers have choices now as to which industry they want to go back to, especially as I mentioned on the lower skill level, lower paying jobs. That's why hospitality industry has been hit hard because there are so many options for folks, even if they don't want to sit home and keep collecting the check and past September 30th, as you said, they'll have options as to where they go back to. And so be interesting to see which industries benefit and which ones remain lagging behind in that scheme.
Well, we'll get the inside poop from the people that you get your commentaries from, so it may reflect it in the respondents as to what they're saying. So I look forward to that.
Likewise.
I do want to point out to our viewers and also to our listeners, if you go to ismworld.org, you will find a link to the report. You will also find a link to this live broadcast. And what Anthony is going over, the amount of depth, and we're just getting the summary material, is a very lengthy document from the Institute of Supply Management that covers every industry and what's happening in those industries. We encourage you to get a copy of that report because it really gives you a feel for where you are in your sector and where the industry is going and the manufacturing as well. If you're in retail, you're fed by the manufacturing industry. Anthony, this continues to be excellent information.
Well, when I saw you hold up the report like that, it kind of reminded me of Las Vegas at a blackjack table. It looked like a deck of cards, especially with the yellow jacket.
Give us kind of a summary of where we think things are going. We're now going to be moving through September and October. These are the months where the orders from the previous months of the year are beginning to hit port, hopefully getting unloaded and moving into retail. This could be a significant challenge all around, but this seems so strong. And as Tim Fiore mentioned, we're into 14 months of a average 35, 36 month expansion cycle. Good through the end of the year, Anthony?
Definitely. We're going to see continued growth in this sector. I will say that I was a bit surprised with August numbers that we were able to maintain such a high, strong level of growth. The expansionary territory that we're in, over 60. And as Lou pointed out, 6 months, over 60. When you look at it, I was a bit surprised that coming off of the all-time highs that we stayed at this high level. I think we'll still continue on a path of strong growth. It may pull back a bit again. And I think it's mostly related to the fact that we don't have the capacity that we keep touching on right now. And that's not a bad thing. I think the capacity has helped to regulate some things. The demand is very strong. I think we've had a little bit of easing in the pent-up demand, and what we're seeing now is just the catch up because the supply is not there. I think we'll continue to see strong pricing. There's still pricing pressure out there. I think that deliveries, it's going to be some time before they improve. As I mentioned earlier, it's probably going to be throughout this year and into the first quarter until we start getting some things aligned as far as the logistics are concerned. But I think overall, this sector is set up nicely to have this continued positive growth going forward.
We would certainly encourage people who are in supply chain or thinking about getting into this very hot field, which is supply chain, to go to ismworld.org and look at their certifications. You may want to become a certified purchasing manager. They've got some great courses there that help you on your career journey. So we encourage you to go there for yet another reason. Anthony, we appreciate you being with us each month and sharing this incredibly important report, trying to get more in depth than we get or even you get on the mainstream media, because it's not just the number. That number is a roll up from all of the industry sectors and all of the different areas of the report.
Well, yes, definitely. I always like to point out that when you look at both the manufacturing and the services sector and how the survey respondents that we have represent small, medium, and large companies, and it's based on the industry's contribution to GDP, and the respondents are comprised as like that. And if you look at the ISM report historically, how closely it maps to GDP, and there were many, many modeling exercises done, algorithms put in place to come up with the best way to figure out what the composite would be and how to weight it. And so this report really is a true indication of what's going on. These individuals that are supply management professionals in their companies, they move across all the disciplines across their enterprise, and they're able to gather the information as to what's happening. And that's why the other thing is the timeliness of this report, with manufacturing coming out the first business day of each month and the services the third business day each month. It's quick, and it's giving an accurate picture as to what's going on across these different industries that comprise both sectors.
And I've been following you since, I don't know, when was the beginning of all this? In the 40s?
It came about actually after, it was during the Depression when manufacturing first came out. So I think it goes back to like 1931, somewhere around there.
Well, I've only been watching since the 50s, 55. And it's amazing how closely my other business, All Metals and Forge Group, tracks the manufacturing numbers and the sectors that we supply to. So I've been watching it because it helps me with my business. And I recommend that all of our listeners do the same. You go to their website, which is ismworld.org. Did I get that right?
You did.
All right. Okay. So thank you very much. We appreciate all the information. Tim?
And we want to remind all of our listeners and viewers to go to jacketmediaco.com. You can see that underneath our logo, where you will find all of the podcasts that we do. We also encourage you to go to ismworld.org and be prepared each first day of the month, business day, and each third business day of the month to tap into these live broadcasts so you can get more in-depth information other than just a couple of quick comments on the mainstream news. It's the only place we really drill down into the report. And thank you for listening to this episode of Manufacturing Talk Radio.